skills that Bob Ray Sanders used successfully are also utilized by writers who work in other fields. In our next segment, we'll see how these skills are applied in academia. We're dealing with the art of persuasion. To be convincing, we need specific reasons to support our arguments. We can also use examples, statistics, facts, expert opinions, and quotations to convince our audience. Now let's meet a college professor who successfully used these persuasive techniques in an article for a professional journal. James Writing-In is an assistant professor in the School of Justice Studies at Arizona State University. A Pawnee Indian, he took particular interest in an incident that occurred in 1869. 6 Pawnee scouts were slain and their heads were removed for scientific study. In an essay published in the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, he made an argument to have their 6 crania returned.
The thesis in 6 Pawnee crania is that the killing and decapitation of these individuals was a historical wrong. And to rectify this wrong, these institutions that now hold those 6 remains should return them to the Pawnee people for proper reburial. Actually, they have agreed to do so now, and we being the Pawnee people, will be reburying those crania in the springtime.
Writing-In's interest in the subject went beyond the return of the crania. Writing about the death and dismemberment of his ancestors was an opportunity to comment on a broader issue.
I focused on the 6 crania as a case study because their story needed to be told. I was seeking to tell what those individuals meant in Pawnee culture while they were still living, their roles, and what their deaths meant to the people at the time and also to contemporary Pawnee Indians.
When he wrote his essay, Writing-In carefully detailed even the grisly aspects of the event.
This incident constitutes an injustice. To skim over it superficially would be to do an injustice to this story, and the inclusion of this evidence makes the story more meaningful. It describes things in the context that they occurred rather than how we may want them to have occurred. We need to uncover, as historians, many of these injustices that occurred so we can realize the depth of the problems that have existed in this country.
In order to build credibility for his argument, Writing-In used careful scholarship when assembling the facts of the essay.
I used a fairly standard historical approach in writing this, and that the way we establish our credibility is to cite as often as we can. And anytime we've come across a primary document that has meaning and that really fits into the story, we integrate it in, and we have to cite it.
Writing-In also considered the tone of the essay.
I chose a conciliatory tone in that essay for the primary reason that if you're too adversarial, you can turn off an audience. That people will say that he's just got another axe to grind, or that he's just distorting things for a political agenda. Well, I do admit that there was an agenda to this, and this agenda was to bring justice. And I think that the way that we work to bring justice is to look at situations and present them in terms that are that people can understand without really alienating them.
Although the primary aim of Writing-In's essay was to persuade, a subordinate aim was to inform his readers.
I had an intent in writing this is to be as inclusive as possible and to present elements in a story that I consider to be relevant to these people's lives and to the lives of current-day Pawnee. So that's why I use the strategy of discussing the role of men in Pawnee society, the legacy established by these individuals who were Pawnee Scouts of military service for the United States, and that continues today, and that's a very important part of contemporary Pawnee culture, that military experience. You know, veterans in Pawnee culture are very important today, and I think that a lot of our people did not know this story. It's been suppressed in historical documentation. So I was writing it to inform the Pawnee people as well of the incident that is largely forgotten through oral history.
As passionate as he was about his subject, Writing-In found that writing the essay was daunting.
Writing, I find to be very difficult. I have to write and rewrite many times, and I'm really never satisfied with anything I write. I always have feelings that it could be better. And I think that where I see many students as a college professor, where they fall short is they kind of become discouraged and don't really want to put the extra time that it requires into becoming a good writer. It takes time, it takes effort for many of us, and it takes rewriting.
Dr. Gibbs, you've read Dr. Writing In's essay. Did you find his thesis convincing?
Absolutely. He did an excellent job in presenting information that was needed. His is a different kind of essay because he's persuasive, but he's also very informative. Not that one isn't informative when one is being persuasive, but here he's giving us historical information that I think is missing, yet he's also trying to persuade his readers to his particular view. He does a very good job.
Well, what evidence did you find convincing in his essay?
Absolutely, practically everything that he said is convincing. In particular, though, he uses memos from the actual people who were there at the time. He uses statements from them. He uses letters. He uses newspaper clippings. Not that we can always believe everything we read in the newspaper, but his evidence is documented. He goes to museums and he quotes from the sources. He also uses some very personal experiences because he's writing about American Indians. He's American Indian, and he buttresses what he says with his own personal experiences.
Well, do you think Writing In's made a good decision in choosing to be conciliatory rather than adversarial in tone?
Oh, he absolutely, I keep saying absolutely, but he did a wonderful job in doing that because this is a very, very controversial subject. I mean, we're talking about grave robbing, in a sense, is what we're talking about because they're examining the skulls of ancestors. So, and he wants to show us, the reader, that this was not something that should have been done, and that also, now that it has been done, the skulls should be returned to their ancestors so that there can be a proper burial. Now, clearly, this is a very controversial kind of subject because what is happening here is that we have, if you want to call it that, blame on both sides. So he has to be very careful about what he's saying because he's talking about what was done and who did it. And in order to do this, he first has to present facts. He understands this. He can't just come out and say, we need to do this. He leads the reader into this. He gives us all kinds of background information, as I said, from a historical standpoint as well as from personal narrative.
Well, then, what other techniques would you recommend to help writers get started on a thesis?
Well, you have to believe in what you're writing about. That's very important. First of all, you have to have some investment in what you're writing about, and that's what the beginning writer wants to think about. We should try to choose topics that actually interest us, topics that we want our readers to know more about, and that we also want to know more about so that we can do research.
All right. Dr. Gibbs, thank you for helping us understand what it means to examine an issue critically, take a position and develop a reasoned argument that supports your stance. In academia, in business, and in other real-life situations, thesis support, taking a position on an issue and defending it, can be an effective means of achieving a persuasive aim.